Hey, what's up? My name is Andrew Bristansky and I am a professional photographer based in Montreal, and today we're going to be talking about the Leica Summicron-C for the Leica M mount. So when I went to drop off the 40mm Heliar 2.8 from Voigtlander that I just did 2 videos on at Camtech, I saw that Jean had a Leica CL sitting on his counter with the 40mm Summicron. So I had a few people reach out to me asking me to review this lens after, I've already mentioned the 40mm Nokton in the past, and of course just doing the 40 2.8 Heliar. The Summicron seems like a logical competitor to that because they're in a very similar price point, and of course this is a Leica lens. So let's talk about whether or not this thing, can keep up with those 2 lenses, the Nokton and the obviously the Heliar, and if it actually does introduce any kind of Leica qualities to the mix. I'll just get it out of the way. It does. It has wonderful Leica look qualities to it, and we're going to talk about those in a second, but let's just talk about the build quality real quick. This is a 1970s Leica lens, so this is when they were kind of dealing with the whole competition from Canon and Nikon and all the DSLRs that were in the market, and the shift from professional photographers that was kind of happening, of course, also with the M5 that came out, which really didn't do them much good. So the CL came out as a kind of entry-level Leica camera, and the C lenses, the Elmar 90f4 and this Summicron-C came out. And Leica doesn't really recognize those lenses as M mount lenses, but obviously 40mm lenses are always kind of an odd choice for Leica M mount cameras because they don't have 40mm frame lines. The CL obviously does. And well, I'm here to tell you, they work perfectly fine. The 40mm is great. The only thing that always caused me to have a little bit of concern was the fact that the helicoid has a kind of angled contact point for the cam arm, whereas normal Leica lenses, it's just like a horizontal movement or vertical movement, whatever you want to say, but to say that it's just one flat thing rubbing against your cam arm. I always wondered if this angled thing here would interfere with the focusing accuracy. It doesn't. It works perfectly fine. The lens is made in Germany, and it has 6 elements in 4 groups, 10 straight cut aperture blades, which I very, very much like, and single coated lenses, a high dispersion fancy glass in the front, and weird 39mm filters with a 0.75 pitch instead of, I think it's like 0.5 normally. So you can't slap on your regular filters on this lens. They had to do something, right, to make this thing even more incompatible. Well, that's it. So it's a good lens. And let's talk about the rendering. So I was very curious. I don't know why I pushed off trying this lens for so long, because now that I've had it, I would have probably just gone this lens instead of the Nokton, to be honest with you, because it has the Leica qualities that I like. Soft overall image with regards to the contrast. The color palette is a little bit more muted, but it isn't, because when I compared it to my Leica Summicron, my 35 Summaron f2.8s, it seemed to keep up. The reds were just a little bit more subdued, as well as the colors in general. But when I compared it to the Nokton, well, I could see that the Nokton, because this is the 40 f1.4 Nokton from Voigtlander that has the multi-coatings, this thing actually has, if you look at the medium darker gray scale, it doesn't have as much detail in the mids as this guy does, which is what I really value about Leica glass, is that you have a much more micro contrast rich image. It's a term I don't like to say, but it is the truth. But it was to say that this lens really does have the Leica rendering. And I find shooting it, you get a more plasticky look than you do get a glassy look that you would with, let's say, the 35 Summaron or the 50 Summilux spherical. But it's a very nice quality, very reminiscent of the lenses of that era. So this is obviously from the 70s, so we're pushing almost 50 years now for this lens. I can't believe it. And here we go. It still holds up. The build quality is sublime. This lens here has honestly just held up remarkably well. The apertures are in half clicks and half stops. Decent feeling aperture clicks. The throw is really smooth, really dampened. I'm very, very impressed by it. And overall, just a wonderful little package. It's very the weight is very balanced, and it's still a light lens, but it's also very small, so it's very hefty for the size, let's say. Brass helicoid as well, so you really get that feeling. The only thing that isn't metal or glass on this thing is the tab, and I'm also not a really big fan of the tab because I'm never sure where to grab it. You know, I just kind of like rest my finger on the bottom of the triangle, but it has a tendency to slip, and I don't know, it's not as accurate, I would say, as like a regular concave tab. And also the aperture, I'm a big fan of this because you can see where you are in your stops on your aperture, right? Because if you check it out, you can see there's like there's like a recessed portion of the ring, and you can get a feel of where you are without looking at your lens, because looking at the lens is not something you do that often because it is so small. There's no finder blockage, I can't see it in the finder, and honestly it's just such a compact package that when you put it on your Leica M cameras, you just can walk around with it all day, and that's exactly what I did with this lens. So honestly, as a daily carry lens, this is a really compelling offer. Shooting it wide open though, you will notice that the image is a little bit softer throughout the extremities of the frame. In the middle, it's nice and sharp with a nice gradient fall off that you can see that your sharpness is there, but there's like a veiling flare covering the entire image, and there's a lot of like astigmatism and coma as you get away from the center portion of your image. But it really gives it a classic painterly charm coupled with a very funny soap bubble looking bokeh. So the bokeh balls are like very outlined and defined, and so they can be distracting depending on your subject matter. However, you do kind of get a nice Leica glow, so the bokeh and the out of focus areas have lower contrast than your subject would, and you can get this nice 3D look with this lens quite well, I have to say. And even if the bokeh balls can be a little bit more distracting at times, it still does good for medium-sized prints. Up to an 8x10, I find that looking at my screens at least, it looks fine to me. And I kind of enjoy the distinguishable properties of this lens brings to the table. And what's really fascinating though is when you stop it down to f2.8, you get a much sharper image already. The vignetting starts to dissipate just a bit. There isn't a lot of vignetting on this lens to begin with, but it pretty much is remedied by f4, which is wonderful. And at f2.8, you've got a much sharper image across the frame. f4, as sharp as you want it to be. f5.6 and f8, you're dealing with a tack sharp lens. There is no really dips or lack of sharpness anywhere. Maybe in the extreme corners and the tops, but like really we're splitting hairs, because at f8 this lens does everything I want it to do, which is really, really welcome. So for street photography, for landscapes, whatever you need to stop down for, this thing holds up. It really, and it looks just like my other Leica lenses do when you're looking at them at 100%. It's very, very nice. At f2 though, you're dealing with a very, very character-rich lens. And so with Leica lenses in general, when you buy a Leica lens, you're paying for two things. Build quality aside, name aside, you're paying for really good optics and unique rendering qualities of the lenses. So if a lens has more funky rendering, you're gonna be paying more. If it has more optical performance, you're also gonna be paying more. So the Apo Summicrons or the Summiluxes of yesteryear, well, those ones fetch high prices because they're so unique. So you're paying more for either. So I find Summicron lenses are always a sweet spot because you get nice rendering, distinguishable looking images, and very, very good optical performances. And this lens is no exception to the cause, and I'm very happy to say that because I was very curious, because these lenses always fetch less money than the Leica M counterparts, and obviously it being a 40mm lens does bring another challenge to the table where you have to now frame with a different focal length than you can see through your viewfinder. Get over it. I've had 3 40mm lenses in my possession over the last month, and I can tell you I've gotten so used to the focal length. I can predict for the framing super easily, and I just actually did an engagement shoot with this lens and I was spot on. So it becomes second nature. You get very used to the framing with these lenses. You just have to exercise your visual muscles, your eyes, to accommodate for that framing. Just like if you shoot 35mm a lot as a Leica shooter, you kind of stop looking at the frame lines after a while. That's when you can start zone focusing. This lens, same kind of thing. So wide open, it's nice, very glowy, dreamy, with good sharpness, and a pretty hazier image. I don't want to say hazy, but because the lens I have at least here doesn't have any internal haze in it, it's in great condition. So that is an optical quality from, I guess, the single coatings and of course the design that it stems from. And what's really nice about having few optical elements in this lens design is that you can benefit from that Leica look, that lower, that micro contrast obviously, but the lower contrast in general, and wonderful, wonderful colors. Simple lens designs benefit when they're well done from very good colors, very good micro contrast. This lens does it all. The bokeh soap bubble effect, it can be desired, but it can also be a nuisance. The flaring, for the most part, I enjoyed it. However, during the engagement shoot, for example, I did notice that the veiled flaring that I would get when the sun or any kind of bright lights and high contrast areas that you have to deal with would come into play. I had to work around it, and unfortunately, it's not all that desirable, and it's hard to avoid with this lens in particular. So just be wary of that. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. The sharpness, I like the rendering of this lens, I have to say. It's very classic and it's of the time. This is from the 70s, right? So we're on 50 years here. The fact that it can keep up today is also always a statement to Leica lens quality. So the Summicron-C over here, this 40mm, really, really keeps up. I can tell you that if you're not afraid of the 40mm focal length, or you just want to dip your toes in the Summicron world, this lens does it. I'm very, very happy to say that. Yay, because I was always a little bit wary of this lens, because I always wondered if the price reflected its performance, and with regards to the ridiculous prices that we pay for these Leica lenses, this lens is a bargain. And after comparing it and checking it out, it does feel like a bargain. What it does feel like to me though, is it feels a lot like the 40mm Nokton here from Voigtlander, and I guess the 35 Summilux pre-spherical that the Nokton tries to emulate. It feels like you're getting two lenses for one with this lens. At f2, you're getting a dreamy, very characterful lens, with kind of a softer image throughout, but it still has nice sharpness, glowy, very glowy. And stop it down to f2.8 and then even f4, and you got a sharp, very nice contrast-rich image, good saturation throughout, and just a wonderful performer. The 40 Nokton is very similar with that, and obviously the Summilux pre-spherical, the 35, it does the same thing, 1.4, very glowy, and then as you stop that lens down, you get a much sharper image, and this lens does it. There was no noticeable focus shift, which is really nice. And the bokeh really cleans up at around f2.8, which is also nice because this lens has half-stop clicks. So as you make your way through the aperture range, you'll see that the image really just cleans up and it gets more and more modern looking. And what I really liked about it is it does have a plasticky look, like I said, and glassy, if you will, as well. I was really blown away when I tested this lens out immediately after I got it. I just took it home and slapped it on my M10 and went away shooting with it for the past few weeks, and it's such an easy carry lens. The image quality becomes very predictable. The flaring can be nice and welcome, or a little bit too much depending on the environment, but you can accommodate for it and know that it's there, and it's not going to be a hindrance too much depending on your subject matter, obviously. But at the end of the day, I'm very happy to say and report that this lens really, really kicks butt. It really, really goes well on the Leica M mount cameras. So even though it's like a C mount, it is indeed worthy of going on your Leica M mount cameras. Clicks in place, wonderful, feels at home. And the finer blockage, I mean, you can't even see this lens. I could just see the very tip of the aperture ring of the lens. So wonderful, wonderful daily carry lens, great for pictures of friends or just nice pictures in general that you want to have very characterful, very images that you can distinguish from the rest. And I think that's where this lens shines, is that, like I said, at f2 you have a lens that you can really pull and look at, and really stands out, I mean, from your images that you do take. And slopping it down, you get a very decent performer that you can't complain about. So there is some coma in the edges of the frame, and just don't shoot this thing wide open at landscapes and you're gonna be fine. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm very, very pleased with this lens. I would happily own it. And if you're looking at getting one of these, or if you're just curious, jump on one. They're really good and they're not too expensive. And I bet you anything they'll be going up in price as time goes on, just like all Leica cameras other than the digital ones. All right, so thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video. And of course, thank you Camtech once again for supplying the lens.